So, firstly, just a little bit about myself. Everybody can see the screen. Is that correct? If there is anybody, just message us and let me know, please. So as I said, I'm Leon van Rensburg. I live in South Africa. I have lived in Mozambique and in England and a couple other countries as well. I have a checkered past, but primarily it's around business turnaround, even in the hospitality sector. And it's understanding what businesses need to do in order to get ahead and know what path to follow to get out of the slump. The economy hasn't been on our side for the best part of a decade, and this has really sparked interest with me for small to medium enterprises and micro enterprises to shift through this economic stages as we experience worldwide. So if everybody is ready, then let's get cracking throughout the presentation then. Cool. So can I ask you very quickly, just to type a very short answer to the question, what is opportunity cost? I want to get a sense of who knows what opportunity cost actually is. It is an economic term that gets used quite widely when we talk about microeconomics, and it's particularly aimed for the businesses. So for those of you that's interested, very quickly just jot down on the chat and let me know what opportunity cost actually means. Let's have a look. Okay, so opportunity cost from microeconomics textbooks that I had and through some of my studies, it is the opportunity cost of a choice is the value of the best foregone opportunity. So if we had to put in layman's terms, opportunity cost of a decision that you're about to make is the value, the perceived value of the best opportunity that you have not taken. And when I look at what BIM stands for, Building Information Modeling, and what it means to most organizations, I see a lot of people misinterpret what it could mean for their own companies. And this is why it sparked the session that I wanted to have this afternoon. And I want to thank BIM Africa and Moses for all your work and for making this a reality. I am of the belief that adopting a methodology similar to BIM and BIM itself would be of great value to organizations, big or small. It really doesn't matter. And I've had the privilege to be in front of organizations that are multinational. I get to travel a fair amount through one of my other companies, and we interact with these organizations regularly. And also deal a lot with either the one-man band or the 10-man size or the 30-man size organizations globally. And when we look at opportunity cost for these guys, what I find is it doesn't really matter where we are in the world. If we do not calculate our opportunities properly, we tend to not understand the impact of the decisions we want to make. When we look at our roads in our business, at some stage, you need to make a decision. Do you take the opportunity? Do you not take the opportunity? Are there other opportunities? Do you take multiple opportunities? These questions come up regularly throughout a business life cycle. I'm pretty sure most of you have made these decisions for majority of your working careers. But the opportunity cost of those is something that I bet none of you have actually sat and thought about. And what would be those values of some of the opportunities? Now, I want to also say that hindsight is the clearest vision that you could have, and it's the only time most of us have 50 out of 20 vision. And it's easy to calculate these costs once you actually know what they are, and the value once you know what they are. So the question that I have for you is, when you assess opportunities in your organization, how do you go about it? What are some of those criteria? Have you got a certain set of criteria? So as I'm going through my presentation, I'll be talking to you about a couple of those types of decisions that come up. Okay. So as I mentioned, in 2008, we saw nice topsy-turvy, and I'm pretty sure if most of you are on the roller coaster, you would agree with me that business has been up and down and not really predictable. If we were to talk about the businesses in our industry, and I refer to that as the architectural space or engineering space, construction space, basically anything to do with a infrastructure or a build project anywhere in the world, our markets have been hit probably the most out of majority other organizations. I have never seen two major construction companies close doors within 5 years from one another in a country. And that's recently occurred in South Africa. I haven't come across big organizations split up into 50 small organizations. That was a construction organization in Dubai to make it viable. So these environments that we are working with, regardless of where we are in the world, is up and down, and it's a constant roller coaster. The thing that we need to ask ourselves is, okay, so if we had to look at our business, how do we weather the change? How do we stay afloat, stay alive? Maybe some of you come from organizations that's been around for 20 years, 30 years, 50 years. Maybe it's 3 or 4 generations old. Maybe it's brand new. Maybe you started it last year, or like myself, started an organization in the beginning of this year. We face many factors, be it economy, be it environmental changes, be it competition, healthy or not, be it technology disruption, be it educational environment that's changing. So we constantly face these factors. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, what do we do when a change comes? The question I want you to think about is, how many of you go out and get more business? How many of you in a time of change go out and say, this is the time that I'm going to be the most aggressive in getting new business? Who looks at cutting costs? That's generally the first thing organizations do, is they cut the costs to ensure that they can survive. Very few organizations that I have interacted with actually go out and they say, okay, we can probably do what we have been doing, but there are many ways that we can do it more efficiently. We can do it better. We can reduce our costs on these. How many of you have that thought? How many of you think about it around your own organization to say, I want to weather the change by becoming more efficient? Now, we can be very educational, we can be very profound, but when we look at BIM and when we look at the ultimate reason BIM got developed was around efficiency. So when you adopt a BIM methodology in your organization, when you adopt the thought processes of that in your organization, immediately what you need to ask yourself is, how efficient will it make me? Now, in utopia, BIM would be the best if we look at the whole supply chain from the start of a project, the owner-operators coming up with the idea, all the way through to the end of a project when the client has finished managing the facility and now wants to tear it down again. Ultimately, BIM would be the best in the complete supply chain, the complete project lifecycle model. But when I broke it down and I started to have a look at these and some of the projects that I was involved, the benefits for organizations are quite miraculous, because it is really testing your tenacity and your ability to become as efficient as possible. The one thing that I know a lot of organizations don't deal with is the people in them, the people that you have in your companies, the people that you have working for you. So I was dealing with a multinational, very big multinational. They have successfully achieved UK level 2 standards in London, and they were hoping to copy paste that and implement it in the African organization. When they went through all the processes, their biggest headache was how do they fit the people that they have to the roles required? How do they match the skill level of the staff to the requirements for this new process? And it actually had them challenging quite a lot of their thought processes. It had them challenging the human resources department a lot. They used to work on the Patterson scale, and the Patterson scale that if you're an engineer with 10 years experience with an honors degree, you are at a certain level. If you're a draftsperson with 5 years experience only on AutoCAD, you have different experience. So these questions all of a sudden became very real, and a lot of organizations look past the human capital impact. Instead of saying to yourself, as I'm going through this journey, maybe somebody puts up their hand and I identify a skill level from somebody within my organization that I never knew existed. To give you an example, I worked with a lady, she was the receptionist of the company. Company is about 35 people strong. And they started their journey through a BIM methodology to not really worry about the project itself, but their own efficiency. So they were looking internally to say, how do we work more smarter? How do we embrace a little bit more technology? And the first thing that they identified was a common data environment, was the single area where they would store all their documents and provide access to people to those documents. When they were going through this, they started interacting with outside people like myself. They were speaking to other consulting engineers, they were speaking to other architects, and they then went to market to try and hire somebody to fit that role. The receptionist was stuck at reception while they were busy with interviews, and there was something wrong with the environment that they were testing, and she very quickly made a decision, and she implemented a quick system. It was a folder structure along with some rights that had to be assigned. She went, after the interviews were concluded, she went to the director and apologized because she felt that she overstepped her boundaries from what she previously was set. And the reality was that that director thankfully looked at it and realized that this person saved him a hell of a lot of money. And that receptionist have now become the pillar for the common data environment. She manages that, and she's still a receptionist, but her other duties now include that environment. So when we look at our human capital, if we say we were to adopt a BIM methodology within your organizations, as you are right now, my question is, who of your staff have got some skills that you may need? Now, the difficult thing is to know what skills, but once you start looking at some of your requirements, and once you start down this journey, just gathering information on what to do with BIM, I guarantee you somebody will put up their hand. The question is, are you looking at that somebody, or do you know better? So the human capital, in my opinion, is something that's very important for organizations to consider. Embracing technology. So I've been part of the BIM Africa group now for about 3 or 4 months. I can't remember exactly. I have been involved with the BIM community in South Africa for about a year. I have been involved around BIM probably for the last 6 years, and I get the same questions constantly. The question that we get is, so what technology do I need? What software do I need? What hardware do I need in order to do BIM? if I had to tell you that in 5 years' time, last week I sat in front of a director of a construction firm in South Africa, and it was the first time in 5 years that a director turned to me and said to me, Leon, this is my process. What software is there that can support this? And this is a big aspect that people misunderstand. Is the software is phenomenal. The technology around there is absolutely incredible. But if it does not support your workflow, if it does not help your organization achieve the workflow and the methodologies you want to follow, then my question is that the right tool, or is your workflows correct? It goes both ways. And when you go down a BIM journey, and when you're assessing your BIM opportunity, I am of the belief that you should embrace technology. Now, I am not saying go out to the nearest reseller and buy software. As most of you know, I do. We do sell the software as well. That's not what I'm advocating. What I am saying is, when you have mapped out your process and when you have looked at what you want to achieve in your workflow, how does the current software in your organization fit those needs? And if you can't afford to change the supporting tool, the technology, then how do you find a workaround until you are in such a position to now upgrade or change your technology? However, in any journey of change, you need to embrace the new. And going into the fourth industrial revolution, as a lot of pundits put it, if you don't embrace technology, it's going to hamper your future growth to some form, shape, or size. And I have seen this in Malawi, I have seen it in Tanzania, I've seen it in Namibia, I have seen it in Ghana recently, where we did a lot of training. And it is phenomenal to see how people's enthusiasm, which is critical in my mind, the enthusiasm change, the approach to problems change, and the can-do attitude all of a sudden develop when they start embracing some of the technology that's out there. There's tech that will cost you almost nothing, and then there's tech that will cost you some money. And I'm not going to run this session today to tell you which is which. I really want you to start asking the questions, does this fit into what I want to do? Okay. I have made a mention of this right now, and that is mapping out your workflows. I do this session with organizations where we sit down and we say, okay, so from the second that you get wind of a project, when somebody has approached you for a project, what's the first things that you do? And we start writing this down either on a whiteboard or on a piece of paper. We also attach, what's the first thing we do? So we write down the whole process, we map the workflows, where does it go from there, etc., etc. The second phase we then sit and say, okay, so which individuals are involved? What I have found is when there are different type of projects, so if you do infrastructure projects, and maybe it's infrastructure specifically to dams or to bridges, it's a similar group of people within an organization. If it's roads, they're a special bunch of people that do roads, right? If it's architectural components, maybe it's the concept component. There's somebody that generally takes a lead on that. If there is the detailing side of things, or whatever the case may be, for majority of these, you've got very specific workflows. Once you've got your workflow mapped, map the people involved. The third layer to that is you now map your technology that you use. So the technology that the people use, you map that to your workflow. Okay. And the last phase, the fourth filter to this whole workflow mapping that we do, is I then sit back and I ask them the question, how many times do they have to redraw the same information purely because they want to get the work out of the door? And that is probably the biggest question that people then sit and realize where they're wasting money, because time ultimately is the money. Okay. We also, during this mapping of the workflows, I tell organizations to ask the following 4 questions to the people, to the supply chain, the up and downstream suppliers. So maybe you're a structural engineer and you get your drawings from an architect and you hand it back down to a main contractor. So if your architect in this scenario is your upstream and your contractor is your downstream, so generally the architect would provide you the drawing or the project in a certain file format. I've been involved where the architect and the structural engineer sat right next to one another at one of the dinners that we hosted, and they were talking and saying, no, we got this waxed. We're getting a DWG. The architect uses Revit. He writes out the DWG and he gives the DWG to the structural engineer, who, so by the way, also uses Revit. And the only question I asked them is, so why don't you share a Revit model? And they both looked at me and they didn't have an answer. So what we started with this process is going to your supply chain and saying to the people, okay, so how are you going to give me the information? How are you giving me the drawing? Okay, what format and why do you give it to me in that format? And the question to you is, when you give out that information, when you supply the information downstream, how do you supply that? What format do you supply that and why? And having these conversations early in the project certainly helps eradicate some of the problems. That is the start, or it's a starting point internally of looking at a BIM methodology and workflow. It's sharing the information and stopping the relearning of information from one phase to the next, from one stakeholder, project stakeholder, to the next project stakeholder. Okay. Once you have done this mapping, it actually becomes very easy for you to identify the areas to focus on. Now, you are most welcome, and I challenge anybody to go out there and start writing your own BEPs, your BIM execution plans, your own MIDPs, your master information delivery plans, and upskill your guys to Revit or to ArchiCAD, depending on your industry, or Tekla structures, and go and invest all of this. And I guarantee you're going to come back to me and you're going to say, we failed. And it's because what people don't realize is they take a weak workflow and they try and adapt that to new technology. That doesn't work. It'll always be weak. So once you've mapped your workflow and you've assessed this, you know that the technology you're using, that's generally the right time to start interacting with experts in the technology component, experts in workflow component, and experts in a BIM environment, and sit around and say, okay, so where's my weakest links? Where is the quick wins for me? And as you're going through this process, you'll realize that starting to adopt a BIM methodology for a small organization is not that difficult. Okay. The other thing that companies don't like doing, and it's a question I like asking them, is who's got a strategic plan written? Has any of you got a strategic plan already written? No? So we tend to forget that we need to be very strategic. If I had to come to you and say to you, take an opportunity, will you take the first opportunity that comes knocking, or will you take every opportunity? Or are you selective to the opportunities that you take, the projects that you take? These are strategic things. What a lot of organizations don't do is they don't understand what their strengths are. They're more worried about their weaknesses. They're more worried about their competition. What they don't realize is you may be brilliant in one aspect of a project. And I normally say to people, I am not technical at all. I'm not an engineer. I have partially 2 degrees. One is a degree in human movement science or biokinetics. So for the sport fans, you'll see some references in my presentation to that. It's got nothing to do with what you're doing right now. The second component is a financial management background. And why? Because when we look at this, the question that we've got to ask ourselves is bottom line, how do we win? How do we make money? How do we stay alive? How do we progress further? You need to be able to be strategic in your thinking when you put this out. Okay, your workflow, the way you do things, that is your identity, and you need to be strategic on how do you utilize that strategy to help win yourself projects and become more successful. Also, use that to your benefit so that people actually want to work with you. The thing with BIM is if you make it complicated, people don't want to work with you. I have been in a couple of scenarios, and for those of you that got your webcams on, shake your head. How many of you have been involved with organizations that say, this is the way we're going to do this project on BIM, and you look at it and you go, I have no idea, it's too complicated. Has there been a few? Yeah, there's a few nods going. So we see this quite regularly. You need to be able to realize what your strategy is and what your objectives for your company is, because only then will you be able to wholeheartedly adopt a proper BIM methodology. I mentioned this, and it's an exercise we did with our staff in one of our companies. Is many companies want to come in and they want to say to you, all right, we'll do a gap analysis. Have you heard of this before? Yeah, plenty of you. Gap analysis. What they do is identify your weaknesses, and then they tell you how to fix your weaknesses. And I'm telling you to screw that. I'm telling you to look at your strengths, and once you identify your strengths, then know what you want to do and how you want to do it. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying forget about your weaknesses. I had a fantastic mentor when I was in hospitality, and we had to turn around about 7 or 8 hotels in about 18 months. And I was very young in my career at that stage. And this mentor came to me and he said to me, a manager wants to do everything themselves because they believe they can do it better than anybody else. But a successful manager will surround themselves with people that are strong in areas that they are weak at. Cool. So how many of you surround yourself with people that are strong in areas that you're weak at, or do you feel threatened by it? So those then become strengths for your organizations. It means you may not be the one carrying the torch to the Olympics, but the person that does that is definitely the strongest, the fastest, and the best to do that. Maybe somebody else wants to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, and they show the required strengths in order to do this. So play to your strengths in your organization, stop hiding your weaknesses. Also, when you start mapping out your processes and you start understanding the use of your technology, it will automatically start highlighting some of your strengths. Okay. One of the things we do very badly as people in any case is communicating. We are notorious bad communicators. The problem that we have, if we look at BIM, the lifeline of BIM is around sharing of information, right? How do you share information if you don't communicate effectively? So we have many means to communicate, but the question is, what are you communicating? This forms a very important part when we look at the adoption of BIM in organizations. Okay. Companies think that they now need to have these massive documentation in order to do this. They think that they need to be educated and write in a certain style in order to adopt this. They think that they have to have the latest available technology to communicate effectively. Why is this part of my opportunity cost? Well, you have people in your organizations that can communicate and probably communicates better than what you do. In my case, I definitely have people working for me that communicates a lot better. And they learn to understand my my mannerisms in order to express our company's desire when they move forward. Give you an example. One of my partners in another business, guy is a phenomenal structural engineer. He can push out work, a project that will take most people 4 months, he does in 2 months. But he communicates in grunts. So I would walk up and I'd go to him, "Hey Ross, how you doing?" He goes, "Yeah, that means he's good." Or he just goes, "That means he's having a difficulty." Now, this is a very bad example of communication, but what I want to point out to you is I've learned to understand it. So for me, the glue that will support your change in your BIM journey is the way that you communicate. It's the way that you express yourself. Tell your staff about your goals, the ambitions, and the strategy of your organizations. Get buy-in from the people that work with you. Consider proper tools to support this, as I mentioned. We have a lot, but if there's something we don't have, then is it really required? And be very critical to this, okay? You need to plan your attack. So when I started my company in January, the foundation of the organization was to help companies on adopting a BIM journey. And I specialize in small to medium enterprises. The reason for this, and the reason why I say you got to plan your attack is very simple. If you can stop doing projects for 3 months, get your documentation in order, get your processes all mapped out, get all of that, but that means for 3 months you don't make money. For 3 months your project stands still. For 3 months the people that work for you don't get fed. Now obviously that is not a very good strategy, correct? So for this reason, you got to plan your attack. You got to decide and map out which of those weakest links you're attacking, and then formulate a plan in order to get that. It will never go according to the plan. I promise you, I have seen this 1,000 times over. But if you have involved your staff, if you've equipped them correctly and equipped yourself correctly, if you have trained them and yourself guided them, and you are mentoring them through this process that you want to achieve, I can guarantee you that if a change were to happen or slightly go off plan, they can get very creative quickly in order to make sure that your project remains on track and that plan gets executed. All you need to do is manage those boundaries and set those boundaries for them. One of the things that a lot of organizations don't realize, and I get asked this question quite regularly, is I want to know how I make money from BIM. And it's actually an indirect answer. Somebody is drawing very nicely on my presentation there. I get asked this question regularly. The answer is not as simple. If you know your strengths, you have mapped your workflows, you have learned to communicate properly, there will be different ways of getting revenue into your organization. Give you an example what one of my clients are doing. They started going through their BIM journey and realized that they're becoming very streamlined. So now what they're doing is every project that they're going on, they're saying to the client, "Hey, Mr. Client, we're actually a subcontractor to the main contractor, so they're very far down the line, but they go back to the beginning and help write an EIR for a client, okay, the exchange information requirement." Now, it may seem stupid to do this when a project is going on, but what they're doing is they're educating the clients on how to do it better the next time. And they're using a real life situation to now educate. What they find is the client all of a sudden on the next project asks them up front, "Listen, can you guys just get involved? And I want you to consult for me while I'm getting my thoughts around a project." That was an additional revenue stream to a subby on a project. So my question to you is, if you're going through this, are you open at looking for opportunities to make money where previously there may not be? Remember, what you're attempting is differentiating yourself from people outside compared to some of your competitors in the market. Opening or embracing these opportunities, opening up to these opportunities could differentiate you quite significantly from those competitors in the market. Have any of you read the ISO 19650? And if you had done a lot of reading on BIM, if you have tried to do a lot of research, it is so easy to overcomplicate things. It is so easy to get stuck in the detail and forget about the basis that it was actually built on. Okay. I like this picture of the red lips because it stands for KISS, and it's not the normal one. It stands for keep it short and simple. When you can overcomplicate things, you can think of absolutely to the nth degree, try and plan things through. Ultimately, when you want to execute something in a small to medium enterprise, you have to keep it simple. Keep the language simple, keep the approach simplistic, because that is when you get the best buy-in from people. A lot of people ask me that they want to get this done within 6 months or 3 months or whatever the time frame is. This is not a sprint. You will be doing constant changes to your workflow. You will be doing constant evaluations on new technology and better ways of doing things and testing things out. If you were to think that you're going to buy something off the shelf and implement it and it will work, the answer is you have placed the wrong value on this opportunity of BIM. Realize that it's the small wins. Realize that it's the small steps for organizations to start moving through. And ultimately, it could be absolutely perfect. You can have, in this case, Tiger Woods, the nicest swing, the most stable core. You can have absolutely perfect written workflows with the best technology out there. And it may fail you time and time and time again. But potentially ensuring that you've crossed all your T's, dotted all your I's, making sure that your checks are balanced and things are working the way that they have worked in the past, and you can just do it faster, is a good way to do it. So although your BIM journey may not look perfect, my challenge to you is start, even if it looks funny, even if it sounds weird, even if it doesn't make sense to you, even if you think you don't know. By doing a couple of the first steps that I showed you, I guarantee you, you will already be on your way to a BIM journey. But you just have to do it. We all want to sit one day and look down and say, okay, so how's this gone? We have now changed the organization. We've looked at this. Maybe you've mapped this out in your head exactly how you think it's gone. My question is does your view look that good in your mind? When you value the opportunity in front of you for BIM or for any other project for that matter, the question that I've got for you is, does it really match up to your utopia? If it doesn't, go back and change it. But where I would like you guys to be is at the end where you can look at that view and you can say, yep, we're on top of the world in our game. We know what we're doing. So I want to share with you a couple of other stories from clients. So there are 3 clients, and I've picked them very carefully. And the reason for that is, one is a subcontractor. They play such a minor role in projects, and they decided to adopt a BIM methodology internally. The second is a 2-man consulting engineer. Now, from having a look at the BIM Africa environment, there seem to be plenty of people that are below 5 or 10 people. And I thought that this would be a great fit. That company, the 2-man consulting engineer, is based in Kenya. And the last one is a medium organization, and they got about 15 to 20 people, and they're based right next door to us, actually, in Pretoria. So the first company, as I mentioned, they're a subcontractor on a project. They've implemented BIM processes, so they did the whole costing of the exercise, and they then mapped their workflows, and they decided to attack a few things. Part of their strategy was to reduce their safety, improve their safety and reduce their risk. That was part of their strategy. Those were two objectives that they wanted to achieve. They were, the role that they played on projects was mainly a safety role. And the project that they implemented it on, although it was halfway through the project, the first half of the project would see safety incidences as much as 2 incidences per week. Okay, somebody getting hurt, and they had a couple of fatalities. After implementing the process, and again, this wasn't perfect. Okay, it didn't go smooth from day one. They all of a sudden lost all their drawings. They couldn't get access to the data when they went to the field, and I can go on. But from the date that they implemented their BIM methodology internally in their own organization, they went 395 days on that project without a single safety incident. Guys, they went from 2 incidences a week to none for longer than a year on a project. And this is somebody that didn't do it perfectly. Okay. The second thing that they really wanted to do was reduce that risk that I was talking about. So for most of you, you've got professional indemnity insurance and a few other things linked to a risk factor in your organizations. You've got insurances, etc. What they were able to do from a bottom line cost perspective, after doing this, they reduced their PI by as much as 75% because they found that they were way overinsured. Now, if you had to look at your professional indemnity or your insurances on projects, if you could reduce that, that is a bottom line saving that you are making per project that you're attempting to take on. But it has to be calculated. You have to be able to calculate the risk and understand that when you drop that, there's an implementation that it requires upfront. What I mean by that, so these guys had to make an investment of some sorts, and for them it was training their staff. They didn't understand the tools that they were using so well, and they needed to get a couple of mobile devices for the field. That was the most significant changes. And there was a risk associated to this investment that paid off at the end of the day. Okay. The second company, the 2-man consulting engineer, their 2 objectives that they wanted to do. So the guy that heads this up was part of a big multinational firm. He implemented a BIM process on a couple of projects with 0 input from anybody else. And he broke away because he got frustrated with the workings, and he thought that he can do it better. This organization, for a long time, it was only one person, still trying to take on structural engineering work as one person. Now, for those of you in the field, you'll realize that it's a pretty tall order when you start talking about process and power projects. Okay, you struggle to do this with one person. So for him, it was critical to get the workflows right. From the second that project lands in to the second that project goes out of their doors, they have 0 redundancies. In other words, there's not one instance where anybody is redrawing or redoing any part of a project. They do it right from the get-go. Now, how many of you get that right in your projects? So for them, it was twofold. They had to map their workflow, what I was referring to earlier. And the second thing was they had to adopt certain technologies in order to get this right. They couldn't do this with the normal things that were out there. Okay. The last thing is that they had was time. As a single person or a 2-man consulting engineer, these are generally the companies that work 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, or 6 days a week, and get very little time with their families and with their friends. To the point where he started working Monday to Friday, 8 to 5. That was his office hours. He took on 2 extra projects per month because he was so efficient that it didn't affect him. He didn't have to work longer than what was required. Okay. Ultimately, after doing this, his profitability was able to increase by as much as the last stats that I saw was about 55% more profit that he was making. This is because he could take on additional projects, not raise his project overheads or his capital expenditures, and for that reason, those profits basically fell to him at the end of the day. The last one is the medium consulting firm. I really like working with this client. They are a multidisciplinary consulting engineering firm in Pretoria. They do roads, bridges, they do buildings, hospitals, schools. They don't do dams. They do housing as well. The reason why I like them is when I sat down and I had my first workflow mapping, the first thing they said to me is, you see that old guy in the corner there? Don't touch him. He works on 2-dimensional drawings. That's all he's going to do. Don't say anything to him. He will not change. I said to him, okay, fine. He turned around and he said, okay, but now a proper BIM process will not be, or he won't be able to implement a BIM process. I said to him, if you were to benchmark it against the UK level 2, the answer is yes, you will not be able to get it. But most organizations, if I use the UK roadmap, they are somewhere between a 0 and a 1, or a 0, 1 and a 2, or a 1 and a 2. So the question is, are you more 0 and a 1, or more a 1 and a 2 leading towards a 2? Because they are a small team, he was very quickly able to make changes within his company. So he sent a few people for training after we did the mapping. He started talking to the client around how does he get information, why does he get it in that way, is there any intelligent ways and manners that he could get this information. When they started having those conversations, the client then said, but you are so far ahead on the project. And he said, no, I'm just able to communicate more clearly. We started that journey in February last year. In October, one Friday afternoon, you get a phone call right about this time from the client to say to him, listen, I have moved the whole project up by 3 months. We're going to start breaking ground in December instead of in March next year. Now, if in majority of your projects, if you had to get that type of communication from a client, your first instinct would be, oh, we are screwed. He thought the same. He went home, enjoyed his weekend, got home, got to work on Monday, looked at the work that they've done, and they realized because he used effective technology to support his workflows, and it was pretty solid workflows at that stage, he was able to produce the drawings required for construction by Wednesday, which he did. The agility of small and medium enterprises is something that has to be factored into your opportunity cost. If you are involved in big organizations, multinationals, and you guys know them, the ACOMs, the Oricons, the Arabs, the Hatches, Royal Haskoning, etc., Atkins. These organizations may have small teams that are easy to mobilize, but as an organization itself, to change the way they're heading is not as flexible. And this is something that should really be considered when you're looking at your opportunity cost for a small to medium enterprise. The other thing for this client, they have been a client of one of our organizations for over 30 years. They are moving from, it's a second generation that's now taking over the business. And the problem that they started having is they started losing out projects because of the quality. of their work because they were only dealing with two-dimensional drawings, and there were some issues with that. The second that they were able to change and adopt a BIM methodology a little bit more effectively, their quality improved. When the quality improved, all of a sudden the clients, in this case, the client gave him, initially it was only the ground and first floor of a hospital. When they saw the work that they delivered, they came back and they gave him 2 more hospitals on top of that. And that is based on the quality of the work that they could now produce. How many of your clients come back to you and saying to you, can we make these changes? How many times do you walk away from a project thinking that your quality could have been better? Ultimately, I don't think anybody would disagree with me that the person that benefits, or the persona that benefits the most from following a BIM process, is the client, because they're the ones that need to manage this process for the next, or the facility for the next 20, 30, 50, 100 years. And if the quality is something that they can't bank on, it's something that will always come back to you as an organization. So lastly, from my side, is the BIM journey that you're considering, all of you being part of BIM Africa and listening to this talk because maybe you are thinking of taking on a BIM journey in your organization. Does this opportunity cost look favorable for you, or are you going to turn your back on it? And it's very difficult to stand and say, or sit and say to somebody that I promise you that it will be beneficial. Every business is different. I had a client that said to me, Leon, my workflows are so solid. He was doing steel work with rebar detailing. On average, his rebar detailing for a 3,000 square meter facility would take him about 3 days. We looked at his workflow. His workflow was solid. We introduced new technology, and he did his complete 3,000 square meter slab with detailing. He did in 3 hours. We took him from 3 days to 3 hours. So when we look at efficiencies, when we consider the impact, be very critical to your own organization. Ask yourself, is it really the best way of doing this? So don't let BIM, in my opinion, be a foregone opportunity for you. I see the value of BIM in larger capital projects that we are busy with. I am very involved with Construction Industry Institute, the Africa component and the international one. We do a lot of research with Deloitte infrastructure. And what we come across is that people shy away from BIM and BIM methodologies and adopting BIM because they think that it has to be everybody in order for this to be successful. Well, there is some truth in that. In order for BIM to live to its full entirety, yes, it has to be everybody. In order for your organization to start and to become more efficient by adopting a BIM methodology internally, you're already achieving some of those factors. Now the to exclude those for a specific reason. Showing you what one organization has done does not mean that your organization will do it. Hell, maybe your organization will beat it. What I really wanted you to take away from this is every single one of you are able to start your journey in BIM with a few basic questions with a few basic things to look at within your organizations. If you assess those, I promise you, you'll look back at this and you go, yep, we'll take this on. We'll take on a BIM journey, I guarantee you. Cool. So thank you very much for listening to me. Are there any questions?
Thank you
Nice
for
little feedback.
the presentation. Do we have any questions from anybody? Kindly ask your questions if you do have a question. Okay, so if there are no questions, we can.
Unfortunately, hi.
Hello?
Hi. Unfortunately, I just joined. Is there a recorded version we could
Yes,
look at?
a recorded version will be made available after the session. Okay, thank you all for joining. Thank you, Leon, for the presentation. We really appreciate you, and we believe that interesting and insightful contributions like this would contribute to the greater growth of the construction industry across Africa.
You pursue me with your noise, my friend.
Thank you, Moses. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for your time. If there are any questions, you're welcome to ask it on the BIM Africa group, and we can then take it from there. Okay. Thank you.
Nice day to everyone. Take care.